Hi, and welcome to Coach's Chat. I'm so excited to share this content with you, to share this journey. We started our breath practice to cultivate mindfulness and using the somatics, using our body's sensations, our feedback loops to inform and to shift our subtle body by way of paying attention. And mindfulness as a discipline is not just the paying attention. It's also cultivating the discipline to know when we don't need to pay attention and we can just be. But there's also that sense of paying attention outward and paying attention inward. So we kind of navigate this mindfulness as a bit of a catch-all umbrella. And in a lot of ways, mindfulness has become the mainstream terminology to make the practices of meditation more translatable to the average householder. And there's some cultural expectations and laying on of perhaps phenomenon that we don't need to go into for our Coach's Chat. But the truth of the matter is that we don't exist in isolation. We exist surrounded in the culture that we have grown up in or chosen to live in. And a lot of times that culture has laid on expectations, taught us things that perhaps we've never actually paid attention to. We've never considered that was a choice. So I lay that groundwork because I'm going to come back and share something with you that I'm wrestling with because it rubs up against some of my cultural teaching as a child growing up in the Christian Catholic faith. We'll come back to that. So in a nutshell, mindfulness is simply the practice of paying attention and choosing what we pay attention to. Now, mindfulness can happen in a quiet, serene place, much like what we call meditation, but it can also happen in a spur of a moment where we kind of wake up because crisis has made itself known, or emergency has arrived, or a strong input of sensory data has called us to pay attention. That too is mindfulness. So I don't want to discount the idea that mindfulness requires a 24 hours a day diligence of discipline and effort. It's actually much like every other kinds of muscle that we exercise in that we have our focused effort for strength building. That's the discipline, that's the tapas. And then we have our non-effort building. This is our rest and our ease and our allowing, our yielding stage. And as we practice those intentionally, we become more skilled at transitioning between them almost intuitively, which might literally actually not just be almost, it might be that we reanimate that sense of our own birth language of our body. Our bodies, the plural layers of our physical, Annamaya Kosha from the Pancha Kosha tradition, our Pranamaya, our energy body, our Manamaya Kosha, our mind body of the intellectual brain, the emotional heart, and the intuitive belly. It's not that we're going to ever have 100% control over every thought, every idea, every question, or even every somatic experience, meaning my body's movement. But rather, when we pay attention, can we do so to our fullest capacity? And can we then digest that new information to sort out what's working and what's not working so that we can increase our likelihood of doing love, of doing loving kindness, doing good in the world, and feeling good about doing that. We reframe so that we can do more of that. So this brings me to the conundrum that came across me yesterday, 2 days ago. And as I was scrolling through Facebook, honestly, past the point of productivity, past the point of purpose. And I'm grateful that this image came up because it woke me up to what I was doing and where I was putting my attention. But it also triggered me in a way that I had not seen this before, and it really felt yucky. But essentially, it was an image of kind of a serene, meditative, even kind of a healthy space of, And the quote said that Satan doesn't whisper, trust me. Satan whispers, trust yourself. And I felt like I was sucker punched, because that's something that I teach. Trust yourself. Cultivate your own inner knowing, your guru center. Does that make me a facilitator of Satan? I don't think so. I don't think so for even a hot second. But I do know that there are people who rely on that kind of language to decipher the difference between when God speaks, when Spirit speaks, and when temptation takes over. Now, I don't know what your religious or philosophical bent is on the idea of God and Satan, of good and evil, and that's for perhaps a conversation that you and I can have. But I do want to caution in the sense that if we can't trust our inner voice, why should I trust someone else's inner voice? What would give the leader of this denomination, this church, this faith, the right to tell me how to live and want me to trust them when I'm not allowed to trust myself? And to me, that creates a slippery slope of blindly trusting a fallible human. And as aligned as any of us can be in this world, we are still only human. And as humans, we flounder, we fail, we misinterpret, we misspeak. And sometimes it's not how we misspeak, but it's how it's being perceived and interpreted because of someone else's lenses, their story. So I don't know if you've seen this particular campaign, this image. It's been accredited to a pastor that leads a church actually in Virginia. And I don't know anything about him. He looks like a harmless enough, actually delightful person based on his profile that I Googled. And yet, I'm saddened by the idea that people are being told not to trust themselves. Because if we are made, this is now the Christian language, if we are made in God's image, why would I self-loathe? Why is only good accredited to Jesus, to God, to love, and everything that is bad, everything that I do that is a failing or a disappointment or against that intention, my fault or Satan's influence and I'm weak? When can I celebrate my humanness and my connection to love and to divinity and to trust? So I don't hear that Bhante is professing that same notion. In fact, I think the Buddhist practice, the Buddha teaching, and Bhante's is actually saying our loving kindness and our mindfulness practices are meant to help us to connect with the witness, the inner knowing from a broader spectrum. Because what this attributed to Satan is really the super ego that thinks it's more important than anyone else, that wants to be in charge and in control. But that's not our inner voice. That's our fear. That's our ungroundedness. That's our sense of not enoughness that's tricking us into thinking that we're supposed to be everything or be perfect. So he tells the story of how Mara, which is illusion, myth, our assumptions of how the world should work. Mara is the embodiment of that in a persona character. Mara visits this monk. And in this state, this unwholesome temptation state, Mara tries to convince the monk that he's unworthy, that he's less than good. This demon, this Mara, sole purpose is to wreak havoc in our lives. And the deepest way to wreak havoc in our lives is to disconnect us from prana, from our buddhi nature, from our alignment. In other words, to fracture our heart, our head heart, our body mind, to create this dissonance so that we don't know where a firm foundation is. We don't know what is real, what is true. So Mara repeatedly creates distractions, which the monk mindfully addresses. I see you, Mara. I see you, self-doubt. I see you, fear. I see you, disappointment. I see you, perfectionism. And then redirects his attention back to his meditation, right? So we have the wandering. We notice the distraction. Name the distraction, because when we name that distraction, we recognize that it's not of us. It's separate. Now, it's a bit of a confusion because it's all yoga. And yet, when we can distinguish that this falsehood isn't part of our nature, we come back to our buddhi nature, they will dissolve. They will become the nothing that they actually are. It's only our attention that gives them shape and form and power, which is really a misdirection of our energy reserves. Do you want to give it attention of shame and blame, or do you want to give it attention of loving kindness? How are you going to use the power of your mind? Because it is powerful. But like all power, it can do good or it can do ill. So when we harness our power, the prana, the thought, the emotion, the stories, can we use them to fuel the loving kindness, the goodness? And until we get to that place where loving kindness and goodness are readily available, then we at least do no harm. Interrupt the harm that might be happening. When we recognize these distractions, when we can name them for what they are, Mara, if nothing else comes to mind, we take away their power and we regain. So it really ends up being that rather than an external locus of power, someone controlling us, we reclaim that sense of power. And that's at the root of the breath. And we have both the autonomic and the anomic, meaning we pay attention, that we do the breath, and then we trust the breath to do us when we aren't paying attention. When I do need to pay attention to my email or to my kid or to the traffic as I cross the street. 24 hours a day of just paying attention to what's in here is only a small part of why I and you are here in this world. We're here to connect. And in order to connect well, we have to grow. And to grow, we have to pay attention so that we can choose where we want to invest that attention. And I'm going to guess that you're more interested in love than you are feeding your fears, your doubts, and ill will, because you've chosen to be here in this practice. So when those doubts, when those fears, when those cravings show up, this is what we call the hindrances to our meditation, the hindrances to us living well. We got to name them for what they are and recognize it at the root. They're Mara. They're an illusion that we have created from our own projections. So how can we get back to the Atman? How can we get back to the buddhi nature? For me, the breath is the most direct route to come back to that embodied sense of being and the energetic sense of union and connection. So with that, my challenge to you is to notice how Mara shows up in your life. In other words, to show up where distraction is hijacking your best intention. And how can you take just a little, I'm talking a 2-minute shift, to reframe that practice, to shift that energy. And it might literally begin with just naming the devil for who the devil is. And then in that practice, you might intentionally spend some time with that Mara illusion and sit with that projected story to see what it might want to teach you. But only do that when you can be in a safe space, mentally, physically, and emotionally, to go to the edge of your comfort and listen. Listen to the illusion. Listen to the Mara, what it might be revealing to you about your fears, about doubt, about your cravings and attachments, so that if needed, you can ask for additional support and help, maybe shifting your attention. So thank you for being here. And I'd love to hear your takeaway in terms of how do you respond to this idea that Satan wants you to trust yourself, and this Christian perspective is saying, don't do that. Don't do that. Trust only God. Trust only me as your preacher. That dissonance, what does that do for you? Or maybe the distraction is the weather, right? You don't want to go to work. Or maybe the distraction is some temptation. We had an addiction or an aversion or a contrary behavior to your primary commitments. What are your distractions? And how do you wrestle with them? Much like this monk wrestled with Mara until he was able to befriend Mara, even trick Mara into becoming like Buddha, and therefore unable to further tempt him. May you breathe deeply and fully. May you move freely and labor lovingly so that you can live vibrantly and intimately with prana. Namaste. So with that, what comments, questions, observations might you have about mindfulness?
I think you touched on this when you were talking about Mara and general lack of grounding. The pastor, I think, is right in the beginning of this journey. I think in the very beginning, at least for me anyways, we talked about it was really difficult to discern between what was my wisdom mind and what was my habits pulling me towards things. I couldn't tell what was really right for me versus just what I was used to doing or what I really wanted in the moment. Mm-hmm. I couldn't tell the difference, and so I needed to lean on an external source.
Absolutely.
To help me sort those out. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, I think he's right in that to do God's work, you cannot trust yourself. When you start, I think you have to start recognizing not everything that I think is right for me. So maybe I can look at some other examples to try and sort out what is right for me until I can truly tap into my wisdom body and know for sure what that is.
Yeah. I think it's a dangerous assumption. That's my concern. To make a blanket statement that don't trust yourself is too dangerous. Because really what we need to cultivate is, what is my intention? And we don't spend much time in this world. What do you hope to happen as a result of this? If you're in that early stages, you're a young soul in this journey. And just like a child gravitates towards perhaps their parent because it's familiar, this is where the caution comes in. Just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's good. There are plenty of harmful parents out there. Does that mean we shouldn't love our parents? No. Does that mean that we shouldn't support parents? No. But it does mean that our greater circle holds parents accountable. Are we doing the same for our leaders? Or are we giving them a pass because of their leader status? Are we shortcutting because it's easier and a soundbite of convenience rather than saying, what's your intention here? Let's talk about that. Because what are you hearing? If it's feeding the sense of love, my guess is that's probably the closer to God and love and union. But if it's feeding a sense of defensiveness, if it's feeding a sense of revenge, if it's feeding a sense of ego inflation and I'm better than, I don't call that Satan. I call that fear. But that's because that's the language that I'm comfortable with. Is it Satan? That's up to whoever believes in Satan to decide. But I don't think that it's fair to say I should trust you when you tell me not to trust me. That's the crux of this mission statement, is that you're bad but I'm good. That doesn't work for me. You're as human as I am. And that's what scares me.
I think you touched on something important there. It can't be, in this case, someone of authority telling you, trust me, not yourself. It needs to be the other way around. It needs to be, I have looked inward and realized that I'm not comfortable trusting my own intuition. So I'm going to ask you for help.
Yes, absolutely. Because again, that puts you in that position of internal locus of control, in which case you are ultimately going to suffer the consequences for the choices you make. So if you make a bad choice, your coach isn't going to be responsible for that bad choice. Unless, of course, the coach told you to do that. Unless the priest, the pastor, the leader said, do this because it's the right thing. I'm telling you it's the right thing. Now I have, I believe, a moral obligation to be equally responsible. But that doesn't take away your responsibility, right?
Yeah, and I think that the finality of his statement is what makes me, I feel a little bad for him, because I think ultimately he has an idea in mind that he can never trust himself, and therefore his congregation should never trust themselves. And I think the entire point of this is, I'm going to temporarily turn over my control in order to get some external help. With the intention, however, coming back to myself and righting my own ship and then continuing on my own journey. But to forever say, I can't be trusted, I'm a sinner, it's all up to you, I think just that tossing aside responsibility completely undermines my whole purpose for this work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess that to add on top of that, if you're going to create a social media post, which is much older than I'm aware of it, and a meme that defines your work in the world, and it tells people not to trust themselves, why should I trust you? Why should I follow you? If you're telling me I can never be worthy, and I'm actually now an agent of Satan. That dissonance, for me, at least I should say, compels, and I think you alluded to this too, having compassion for this person and the following of this person, because they can't know what they don't know. And yet, if you're going to be a leader, again, I speak from having a very strong conviction. My doctorate is in leadership, right? In the sense that leadership matters to me because it's someone who is there to guide those who are less developed in their own identity, less developed in their understanding of their life's work. That's not a diminishing of their value. It's just a diminishing of their capacity to do their fullness. And so we rely on each other. We lean on each other. We support one another. So it kind of breaks my heart a little bit to think that someone who is leading a church doesn't trust God enough to believe that he can trust himself. And that's me putting words in his mouth, but That's my interpretation of how you could come to that. If I ever have a chance to meet him, I'd like to ask him that question. I'd like to hear what he has to say. I know he's not the only one that's teaching this message that you can't trust yourself. But that, in a nutshell, is what's causing people to not trust themselves and therefore dismiss responsibility for what we've done and what we could become to do, to grow, to transform, to shift, and to be more, to be better.
I think there's one last piece here that's bothering me a little bit. It's this feeling that your teachers are always in their best and most brightest position. It's sort of like when you were first talking about YTT and you going through your doctor program, that you're constantly learning new things, that you're constantly retraining and going back and reviewing and all these things to keep yourself up to snuff. I seem to have this misconception that an enlightened teacher is an enlightened teacher, and not that it is this dance back and forth between knowing and learning, and knowing and learning, and knowing and learning. That some of these more soundbitey type posts on Instagram, they have this air of, I know, so I know.
I have arrived.
Right. And instead of saying, I figured out something for a moment, and I'd like to try and share it. Maybe we can figure out a way to stay here.
Yeah.
But that's never been the case, as far as I can see. Every teacher has to constantly learn to be a good teacher. And I think that's something that's holding back a lot of people from trusting themselves, because they see moments of glory shining through their consciousness of, I am love in every way for this moment, and then, shit, I suck again. And so I guess I can't trust me because I don't know how this works. But I think everyone has that same yo-yo effect.
Yeah, and because of our hard wiring, we linger in, we grasp onto the failing as proof of our unworthiness, as proof of our toxicity, as proof of our yuckness, our Satan evilness, rather than, I had a glimmer. If I've had it once, maybe I can find it again. Maybe I can connect with it deeper. So again, we have to come to some sort of acceptance with the reality of our systems, our cultural systems and our biological systems, and wrestle with them, because we continue to evolve, right? Microscopically in the terms of our evolution as beings, perhaps, but as soon as we stop paying attention, we stop growing. And as soon as we stop growing, we really stop living. Trust yourself. And when you don't, seek a circle of support to help you access that broader witness from love. And then own your mistakes, apologize, and grow through them. That's my advice. That's my practice. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.